Now, we all know, Bob, that as a business, when the fight is big enough, you've worked with Don King, you've worked with De La Hoya, even Al Heyman. How do you make this happen?
Al Heyman, he refuses to allow any of his fighters to get beat by a top-ranked fighter. And if Terrence fights Errol Spence, there's one winner, and that's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford fights Errol Spence. There's one winner, and that's Terrence Crawford. And Al Heyman refuses to allow it.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, the news is in that former welterweight champion Danny Garcia is going to be facing Inoue-Dasmarinas on January 25th at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, and Showtime will televise their welterweight fight as a main event. As we all know, the civilized boxing community is aware that Inoue-Dasmarinas is a much better, much higher quality opponent choice than the likes of the WBO welterweight champion Terrence Crawford.
What the fuck's he talking?
Said no one ever. All jokes aside, it's pretty obvious what's going on here. Danny Garcia just so happens to be preserving himself with this Inoue-Dasmarinas fight. It's a tune-up fight. It's a keep busy fight. That's the kind of fight it is. It's a low-risk fight because it just so happens that Danny Garcia's name is in the hat for the Manny Pacquiao sweepstakes, and he doesn't want to take on any chances, any risky opponents, while he waits to be picked. Enter Inoue-Dasmarinas, and we'll talk about him shortly. And, you know, now that 2019 is all but over,
It's come and gone,
and hindsight is 2020, it takes me back to November of last year, when news broke that Top Rank had reached out to Danny Garcia. They wanted him to fight Terrence Crawford, and they had a very lucrative offer on the table for him. Multi-million-dollar guarantee, pay-per-view upside, and a world title opportunity that Danny Garcia doesn't actually deserve, but they were willing to give him, you know? And Danny wasn't interested in that opportunity. I mean, that's what the timeline shows. That even if the offer to fight Terrence Crawford came at a time where the Adrian Granados fight was all but a done deal, even if the offer couldn't be taken up right away, the fight with Adrian, it came and went. Danny Garcia was made this offer, or at least the news of it broke, in November of 2018. He fought Adrian Granados earlier this year, in April. And since April of this year, he hasn't fought since, okay? So if you really were interested in fighting Terrence Crawford, taking him up on that offer, you know, Danny talked a lot of shit online. He talked a lot of shit via social media. But as far as actually pursuing a fight with Terrence Crawford, he never did. And it's not like he didn't have time to do it. Because at any point after that Adrian Granados fight this year, he could have pursued that fight.
but he ain't want it.
Just chose not to.
Make it out what you will.
The news of the offer broke in November of last year. You fought Adrian Granados in April of this year. And since then, you ain't done a goddamn fucking thing. So, I mean, obviously, if you really wanted to fight Terrence Crawford and put your money where your mouth is, you would have fucking did that. This is what it is. It's always like this when it involves Terrence Crawford, though, isn't it? You know? A lot to say. These guys have got a lot to say, though not a lot to do. Enter Inoue-Dasmarinas. What appears to be a keep busy fight. Inoue-Dasmarinas, you know, this is a guy about 5'10", about 71-inch reach, wingspan, whatever. So he's got generous dimensions for the welterweight division, though oddly enough, in spite of his dimensions, he doesn't really have much experience there. A record of 23 wins, 4 losses with 1 draw. This is a guy who was stopped by John Molina, stopped by what was then the undefeated Dejan Zlatijanin, and decisioned by Tevin Farmer some moons ago. That's what this guy is, okay? This is a guy who, yeah, he's been around the block. He's currently coming off a knockout win over Devon Alexander. That's what he's coming off of. But better still, this is a guy who most of his pro experience isn't in the welterweight division. In the welterweight division, outside of that knockout of Devon Alexander, he hasn't actually done anything, okay? Most of his experience is either at lightweight or junior welterweight. An ideal choice for a guy who's looking to keep busy, though not take on very many risks. Another Adrian Granados-esque kind of opponent. That, yeah, you know, this guy's a live one, and he's got some experience to bring to the table. Some good dimensions, too. I mean, 5'10", 71-inch wingspan for the welterweight division. Those actually are good dimensions for the weight. But at the end of the day, I'd say comparatively that Ivan-Redkach is not a better opponent choice, is not a better scalp than
the main machine.
Egidijus-Kavaliauskas. Egidijus-Kavaliauskas is rated as a top 10 welterweight across the board, don't matter where you look. Whereas Ivan-Redkach is nowhere near the top 10.
No!
He's barely done anything in the welterweight division. He's already got a couple of losses. So why would Danny Garcia get a pass for willfully fighting the likes of an Ivan-Redkach at a time where Terence Crawford is being criticized for satisfying his mandatory, for satisfying his obligations as a champion, for abiding by a mandate that is required because he is a world titleist? Why is Terence Crawford facing criticism from certain of the members of the boxing community for fighting an undefeated top 10 welterweight while Danny Garcia picks a cherry in Ivan-Redkach? Because that's what it is.
Yeah!
That's what it is, okay? You had all fucking year to fight the likes of an Ivan-Redkach. You could have fought a guy like that 2-3 times this year alone, yeah. The Adrian Granados fight was all the way back in April. You could have got a fight like this in before the year was out. You could have.
Another cherry pick.
You willfully sat on your hands, chose not to take up Top Rank on their offer to fight Terence Crawford in what would have been a world title fight. Certainly a more interesting situation than this situation.
He's cherry picking. It's what
What are you motherfuckers trying to convince me of now? That Garcia versus Redkach gets your juices going more than Garcia versus Crawford would have?
Why don't you get the fuck
Cut
out
the
of
bullshit.
here?
Cut the shit. Look, I'm not telling you that Danny Garcia hasn't fought good fighters before. I'm not telling you that he doesn't have a good resume. I'm not telling you that. I'm not even telling you that he's a bad fighter. I'm telling you that you can't give Danny a pass for picking the likes of an Ivan-Redkach and criticize Crawford for satisfying his mandatory. You can't do it. You can't do that and make any kind of sense. Because comparatively, not only is Egidijus-Kavaliauskas a better scalp for a welterweight, not only is he a better scalp than Ivan-Redkach, but he's a better scalp than Adrian Granados. At 147, yeah, because Adrian Granados ain't done a goddamn fucking thing at 147. Neither him or Ivan are better scalps than the likes of an undefeated top 10 welterweight. The same applies to Errol Spence and what was his mandatory once in Carlos Ocampo. Egidijus-Kavaliauskas compared to Carlos Ocampo. Yeah, Egidijus is a better scalp because Egidijus is ranked within the top 10 fighters, the very best
10 guys.
10 fighters in the division. Whereas Ocampo was none of those things ahead of that Errol Spence fight. All he was a mandatory challenger via the IBF. But in the greater scheme of things, he was nothing and nobody to the welterweight division. So, for me, this news only accents what I knew already. That Danny Garcia, like a lot of PBC fighters, he's good for the smoke, he's good for the mirrors, he's good for the chatterboxing. But what he's not good for is putting his money where his mouth is. He don't want no parts of Crawford any more than those other guys do, okay? He don't want no parts of that guy. He willfully sat out the majority of the year when there was an offer on the table for him that he could have picked up at any time, but he didn't want it, okay? What you want to do is preserve yourself, and that's why early next year in January, you're fighting fucking Ivan-Redkach. You could have fought that same guy like 4 fucking times this year alone. There was that much time to do it. You didn't want to do it, okay? Danny's looking for an easy win. He's looking for a safe route to a Pacquiao fight. We all know it. And it's really not either or, you know. But that's how guys treat these situations whenever there are risks involved. As if you can't fight Crawford and fight Pacquiao. Maybe the reason you don't want to fight Crawford is because it could derail, you know, a Pacquiao fight. It could be that way. You're afraid of losing in one-sided fashion. It's possible. Anyway, you slice it. You can't sit here giving Danny Garcia a pass for picking a cherry and then turn around and criticize Terence Crawford for satisfying a mandatory. You can't do it. You can't do that. Makes sense. It's for this reason that even though I'm not ultra excited over Crawford versus Kavaliauskas, I have no complaints. I take no issues with that fight because Terence Crawford is simply being the distinguished gentleman, the reigning champion who is satisfying his obligations. That's all he's doing. There's nothing there to criticize. Now, just in keeping with the theme of mandates and mandatories, there are a few going around in the Bantamweight division. Unified champion Naoya Inoue has been ordered by the IBF to satisfy his mandatory Dasmarinas. In the in-between time, the WBC have installed Inoue-Dasmarinas as the mandatory challenger for Nordine Oubaali's title. This is in lieu of Luis Neri, the former mandatory challenger, blowing weight and having to move up to super bantamweight. He can't make bantamweight anymore. Gotta go upstairs. Hey, that's just your fucking problem. Nobody gives a shit. And, you know, I think that this is in some ways an ideal situation because the only guy really making a lot of noise at bantamweight is Naoya Inoue. If anybody knows anybody at that particular weight, they know Naoya. They know that this kid, he's a sensation. He's getting a lot of attention. But the same is not true of the other two champions that are there. You know, Oubaali being one of those champions. I think this presents a unique opportunity for Nordine in the mean and between time to really get people talking, you know, really build the buzz around what could be his fight with Naoya, his unification match. If he goes in there against the former champion, Inoue-Dasmarinas, and he has a good showing, what could be a better showing than what Naoya Inoue put forth, if Oubaali versus Donaire proves to be less competitive than Inoue versus Donaire was, well, that's a good look for Oubaali, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so.
If he makes short work of Nonito. And the selling point, the intrigue here is, it's not a foregone conclusion that he makes short work of Nonito. It's not a foregone conclusion that Nonito loses that fight. It's not. Because we see what Nonito just did. We see the effort that he put forth against Naoya Inoue. Naoya Inoue, who a lot of people, including myself, thought was going to stop him, okay? A lot of people felt, self-included, that Nonito, God bless him, that he's gotten to this point, but, you know, he's getting long in the tooth. He's seen a lot of winners, been around for a lot of moons, and an accurate puncher like Naoya Inoue has got everything it takes to hurt him and get him out of there. And the fight proved to be so much more competitive, albeit better than we all expected. Nonito, you know, he looked like he still got a couple of years in the tank, couple of fights. So here is a world title opportunity to inspire him to put such an effort forth yet again. That's the sizzle, folks. That's the intrigue. It's not a foregone conclusion that either Donaire wins the fight or Oubaali wins the fight. And I like that. I like that in the mean and between time. I like that as a prelude to what could be Oubaali versus Inoue. Maybe Donaire versus Inoue too, if Donaire shocks Oubaali. I think that this is more or less an ideal scenario. I mean, we know that it was a hard fight for Naoya Inoue, that he might have to take his foot off the gas a bit, given some of the injuries he sustained in the Donaire fight. So him satisfying his mandatory kills those two birds with one stone. That yes, he's a champion and he has obligations, but Dasmarinas isn't quite the same caliber of guy as an Oubaali, you know, for example. So there's that, and in the mean in between time, Oubaali gets yet another opportunity to raise his stock, raise his profile against what is a very familiar face and what has proven to be a more formidable fighter than we anticipated, than we gave credit for. I'm not saying Nonito hasn't had an accomplished career. I'm just saying that under those circumstances, he seemed to me like a guy who's aging and who might end up getting retired in the Inoue fight. And he shocked me, man. I think he shocked a lot of people. He looked like just a younger, fresher, formidable guy than how he'd been looking at other weights. So it is a good fight. It is a titillating fight. In all likelihood, it's a fight we're going to see early next year, given the deadline. The deadline for negotiations to come off is January 3rd. So the clock's ticking for these guys to get the goddamn thing done. And I'll give my thoughts on the fight, once it's finalized as the fight date approaches. But as far as what the aesthetic of the fight could be, yeah, I think a fight with Oubaali and Donaire, given what Donaire just showed, yeah, I think it could be a real good fight. And finally, a lot of people turned out for this weekend's fight, heavyweight rematch between Andy Ruiz and Anthony Joshua, and Canelo Alvarez was one of those people, obviously there to support Andy Ruiz. And while he was there, he talked about the proposition of fighting abroad. In many ways, Canelo Alvarez is the face of boxing here stateside. But when you see a guy like Anthony Joshua, who can make fantastic money just staying right there in England, staying right at home, so deciding to fight in Saudi Arabia instead, and that amplifying his celebrity, a guy like Canelo sees that same opportunity as something he would like for himself. And he played with the idea of fighting someone in Saudi Arabia. He played with the idea of fighting in England. He played with the idea of fighting in Japan. Those comments, ladies and gentlemen, lend insights into what potential opponent options are on the table for him. Why would Canelo fight in Japan, and who would he fight there? Ryota Murata. That's who he'd fight there. The former Olympic gold medalist and now the guy who holds the lesser version of Canelo's title at 160. He could fight Ryota Murata there in what could be a massive fight on their shores. It might not mean as much to me and you, but you guys gotta realize that it's a big planet out there, and there's a global market out there to capitalize on. You know, Murata's name, it's not worth a lot of money in the States, so why the fuck would you fight him here? You fight him in Japan, you're fighting the same guy, it's just worth more money. Look at England, okay? Potential pay-per-view opportunities in England for a guy who already has the most lucrative sports contract of any athlete in any sport. If he goes over there to England, DAZN's still going to show the fight here stateside, but he'll be able to capitalize on the UK pay-per-view market. More money for Canelo. And who could he fight there? He could fight Billy Joe Saunders there. He could fight fucking Callum Smith there. Pick your poison, okay? He mentions Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, you know, they chose to host the big rematch between Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz. So who's to say that they wouldn't so choose to host the big rubber match between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin? That's still a possibility. They're on the same side of the street.
That's true.
Canelo Alvarez does, you know, a little bit, you know, he does seem to be coming around a little bit to the proposition that at some point in the near future, he might lock horns with that guy again. And let's be honest, folks, it's a much more winnable fight for Canelo at this stage than it was 1 or 2 years ago. Golovkin's getting older, he's in a transitional phase with a new trainer, and I don't even think they've ironed out all the kinks. Saudi Arabia could be the site for a fight like that. You know, American boxing fans, they're very linear, very willfully ignorant, and they don't realize it's a huge world out there, and there's a global market out there, okay? Boxing is not limited to being a lucrative business here in the States. It's a global market, and depending on who you're fighting and where you're fighting them, you can make a lot of money. I'll tell you, Canelo didn't seem too crazy about fighting Gennady Golovkin for a third time not that long ago. But if he's coming around, I don't think it's because he feels he has unfinished business with Golovkin. I don't think it's because he wants to fight him again, so much as it's an opportunity for Canelo to dip his toe in the pool of another market with a familiar face. You know, they've already been in 2 very big fights already. That could be Canelo's introduction to a new market with a Golovkin rubber match, and that might be the motivating factor. So these are all possibilities, you know, they are. And we're not talking off chance possibilities. We're talking about real and tangible, palpable probabilities.